Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for our second EMP Skillshare. And today's session is called Help Me Help You, Obtaining User Empowerment and Buy-in. My name is Laura Santoyo, and I'm the secretary for NEMPN, or the National Emerging Museum Professionals Network. I also serve as the self-care lead for the advocacy committee. We developed this Skillshare series so that emerging museum professionals could share their varying expertises with other EMPs. As an organization, NEMPN believes in sharing knowledge and resources and learning and growing together. If you're interested in participating in our Skillshare program yourself, you can email me at secretary@nationalempnetwork.org, or there is a Google form that you can fill out. I will drop that information in the chat here in a second. Just some basic housekeeping rules to make sure that tonight's session goes smoothly. This presentation is being recorded for future use. We like to take these videos and upload them to our YouTube channel and then also share across our social platforms. If you don't wish to be visible on the recording, you can turn your video off now. Please keep yourself on mute too for the full length of the presentation so that we can hear the speaker without background noise or interruptions. We also ask that all questions wait until the end. If you think of questions while the speaker is presenting, that's totally fine. Just drop them in the chat box. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Meredith Steinfels and Amanda Dearolph. Meredith is the Assistant Director of Digital Platforms, Media, and Archives at the Hood Museum of Art. She wears many hats as a department head, digital strategist, archivist, and subject matter expert in all the digital platforms within her department. Her practice as a database manager is rooted in empathy and user empowerment, acknowledging the imperfect and often harmful nature of databases and data management. She is currently rethinking ways in which her Indigenous colleagues at the Hood and others can dismantle or deconstruct the rigid enterprise systems and demonstrate different ways of knowing in museum digital platforms. Amanda is the database administrator for TMS, or the museum system, at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Since joining the museum in 2015, she has participated in projects and workflows across the museum, providing data analysis, reporting, writing, and user support. This includes maintaining multiple systems that are integrated with TMS, including the digital asset management system, the online collection platform, and the museum's recently developed object location and movement application. Meredith and Amanda, take it away.
Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself first since you're alphabetically first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So welcome. This is Help Me Help You, Obtaining User Empowerment and Buy-in. And like Laura said, my name is Amanda. I use she, her pronouns. And I am a white woman with dark curly hair wearing dark framed glasses. And I am in my younger brother's room, which means that I am surrounded by furniture that holds lots of Star Wars Legos. And Meredith?
Yep, I'm Meredith Steinfels. I use she, her pronouns. I am Ashkenazi Jewish. My skin is peach, my eyes are green, my hair is long and blonde. I am speaking to you from the unceded lands and waters of the Abenaki Nation, which is currently called New Hampshire. I am in a poorly lit office and there's a skeleton behind me. It is not real. But just know that it's there and it's watching me. Amanda and I have also, we're most reachable on Twitter. So you can reach us at our Twitter handles. And we are always available to talk, hence why we are doing this. And so, which leads me into my first point. Why are we deciding to talk about something that's, you know, not as sexy as other topics, but, you know, because it really was just a trial by fire for us, because learning that soft skill aspect of database management is something that takes years and years and years and trial and error and difficulty, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be a little easier than that. And so we want to try to pass it on. We want to try to clear the way. We want to try to make life easier for people who manage databases, manage digital processes, digital products, or just like there is a thing that you own and you just need your users to do it. Please, we will try our best to help you and help you get your users to help you to help them, hence the title. And it just, you know, you don't learn until you do it, but sometimes it doesn't always happen right away. So Amanda, do you want to thanks?
So like our interest at both of us are primarily work in art museums. So we're going to be talking mostly about collections management systems. Some of what we're talking about can be applicable to constituent and donor management systems and ticketing systems and things like that. But like I said, our practice is primarily in collections management. And so we want to start off with a disclaimer that collection management systems are inherently problematic, and we don't want to do this presentation without acknowledging the limitations of museum databases. So specific to CMSs, they replicate the knowledge environments that they inherited from the days of card catalogs and analog information management. And technologically speaking, these systems are also outdated, and their business models are proprietary systems and expensive, and they usually can't be augmented or augmented very far. And like most importantly, data standards that are built into these systems, but also the content that is held within these systems are usually from a Western and universalist faux neutral data perspective or historic perspective. And these perspectives primarily and more often than not harm marginalized communities. So these are all things that we want to keep in mind when we're going forward. And so with that in mind, these are the central concepts to our approach to technology and database management. We're going to talk about the importance of demonstrating value and decentralizing knowledge creation in your institution, building trust and practicing empathy with users, the significance of training and documentation, the need for digital literacy, and how to leverage institutional muscle memory in your work. You're muted, Meredith.
Of course I am. I'm trying to mute the sound of dog jingle collar behind me. While we go through this, we do also want to, oh, now he's coming to say hi. We want to acknowledge the following. As Amanda said before, we come from an art museum background, so that's really what we can speak to, but that doesn't mean it's not applicable elsewhere. Adjust what we're saying as needed, you know. This is not a one size fits all sort of paternalistic, you must do this talk. It's just some suggestions, you know, and also, you know, your users best. The other thing is that culture eats strategy for breakfast every single day. And I know that all of you have probably faced or will face or are currently facing people saying, well, we just don't do that here, or that's not how it's done here. And that is a really harmful thing to say. We acknowledge it, and we acknowledge also that you may not have the social capital to break that, but we want to help you try. Patience is the number one sort of thing that you really need with this, is that it's nothing's going to happen overnight. So just have patience with whatever you're trying to do. And then the last thing is that you are always going to be the one that cares the most about your database. Nobody else is going to care as deeply as you do. And that is okay. That is your job, to care about your database or your system or your workflow. That your goal isn't to get anybody else to care that much. I know that sounds rough, but it's okay. It really is. We promise. So here are strategies.
So the first thing that you kind of want to acknowledge or keep in mind is that databases, especially if you're working in TMS or something like MIMSI, have so many fields, and no museum, and especially no user, is actually going to use them all. And this is one of the primary ways that you can get target confusion with your users, where you're going to have some people on the spectrum of happy clickers, where they're going to want to fill out everything and do all sorts of things, whether or not that adheres to your standard or is a good use of their time. Or you're going to have the opposite end of the spectrum, where that person gets super overwhelmed and doesn't want to do anything, or they're afraid that they're going to mess something up. So you want to put the rails on tasks. So you're going to start by communicating the bare minimum and scale up as you reach a higher level of engagement or a higher level of data integration, as well as building up people's confidence. And security groups and access levels should reinforce roles and responsibilities. So if you are a conservator who works primarily in doing treatments, there's no reason for that person to have access to or have to enter insurance values, and vice versa. So when you are configuring, one, make sure you're actually configuring and you have a strategy to how you're configuring. You want to configure for efficiency. So you're gonna, if you have the possibility to do this, make sure you have different views and different levels for different user groups. Make sure that the people who need to do that work have the ability to do that work, and in some cases are the only people who can do that work. Hide the fields that you don't need, and you want to use usually the 3 things that you can do when it comes to supplying access to the database. That's view rights, edit rights, and delete rights. Meredith, anything to add?
No, you put it beautifully.
Yeah.
I am the world's best hand holder is probably the thing I say the most in every training that I give. And I say that, you know, I'm just picturing there was one preparator that I worked with, and we'll get to preparators in a bit, but he looked terrified when I showed him the database, and I just kept saying to him, don't worry, I'm the world's best hand holder. You can come to me anytime you want. And what I, you know, as the slide says, this is me making sure that everybody's comfortable, that everybody's confident, and putting my time not just into the initial sort of here's what you do with the database, but creating resources. And you know, the same thing as training wheels, right? You teach that self-sufficiency, you teach literacy within the workflow, and you also make sure that they trust you, because that's really what that is once they know that they can, once your user knows that they can trust you and that you're there for them, they're going to trust the system a little bit more. But keep in mind though, that nobody's ever going to get it right away. That's why you have to be a hand holder. Nobody's going to look at an enterprise level database and say, yes, this makes sense to me. And if they do, they are probably another database manager. They are not a member of your constituency that you are trying to train. So just understand that you're going to show them something, they're probably going to forget it. That's okay. That's why you create these backups. So that's why your door is open or your email is being checked, and you say that's okay. Because it is. This is not a skill that a lot of people come with. This is something that they have to really learn and relearn and relearn. You know, this is a weird thing to say, but having customer service backgrounds are really good skill set, because inside you might be saying, oh my God, I'm saying this for the 50th time, but you learn how to at least sort of set that aside and understand that what they're asking for is once again help. So that's really, I think, just as a random aside. Again, empathy, it's hard, it's scary, it's weird. Most of the staff that we're working with and that we will work with for a while are digital immigrants, not digital natives. Especially when you're working at maybe a smaller museum, people have to do a lot more. Are they really going to want to focus on using the database? Are they really going to think it's their territory? The last thing is documentation. So much documentation, more documentation than you think you will ever write, because if you're not there, if you're on vacation and they need you, they should be able to have some sort of self-sufficiency. And if they panic and they call you or email you, again, it's okay. it's okay for them acknowledge that they're scared and that they need help. Because as we'll go over later, a lot of this is fear-based. This is a new system. This is a new thing. I don't understand it. This is not my area. So like I said, that is the thing that I end most trainings with, is I'm the world's best hand holder. You can ask me anything. I've written this down. Here it is, and I'll send it to you again. And also I squirreled it away in 5 other places on the museum intranet. So it's just.
So building off of hand-holding, I want to preface this with, like many things in my life, this was named and patented by Meredith Steinfels, not by me. But there's a thing called the Amanda Dearolph 3-strike rule. So what this assumes is that you have a person who is either being onboarded for the first time or is learning a new skill, whether that's something that's a change in a role or a new thing that you're rolling out. So it assumes that you're starting off with some sort of training session or an onboarding session. So once that person has had their training and they run into an issue or they forget how to do something or something is broken, they're going to reach out to me. And primarily through email, that's how most of my contact works, especially in the time of a pandemic. And so the first time that they email, you get the first explanation or possibly a second training, and as well as reinforcing like, hey, remember we talked about this, here's the instructions on how to do this, but let me break it down for you one more time. Like I said, here's how you do everything. So we've got that. The next time they email you about the same task that they're having some sort of issue with, that's the second explanation. And so you want to give a slightly shorter explanation and be like, remember we talked about this. The steps are A, B, and C. Here's the documentation. This tells you how to do this task or how to complete this work. And then the next time that they email you and say, hey, I've forgotten how to do this, you only send the link to the documentation that says, here's the instructions, go forth and conquer. So that's the basic rule, right? Where you have every time that someone contacts you with the same skill that they're having trouble with, you're decreasing the amount of hand-holding that you're doing. So there's exceptions to this rule. It's important to know your coworkers. I have certain coworkers who genuinely, I know that they have tried and they have looked and done all of their due diligence before coming to me. And I'm always going to give them a lot more grace than, say, the person who I suspect is purposefully being difficult, because that's what this rule kind of mitigates for either of the two scenarios. Somebody who is genuinely confused and needs help and is just not getting it, or someone who is being willfully difficult and is trying to signal to you, I don't want to do this work, or I shouldn't do this work, or I want you to do this work. But either way, you are going back to the workflow of, or whatever task you have built, and you're reinforcing that to build muscle memory and self-sufficiency. So even if somebody forgets how to do something, they know where to go to find that, and they don't necessarily have to contact you. So with all of that in mind, between our approach and our strategies, we're going to talk about some case studies so that you can apply what we're talking about to actual scenarios that you could run into in a museum. And again, keep in mind, Meredith and I both work in art museums, so this is pretty specific to that experience.
Yeah, not my job, or I don't have time. Prepare or meet database. So as I said before, and I was making reference to a training that I did with a preparator where he just looked the database, said, I can't do this. And this is a man who, when I first met him, sat down next to me. I mean, like literally, this is my second day at my current job. And they didn't tell me how bad it was in terms of just nobody using the database. But I didn't know what I was walking into. And he sits down next to me and he goes, I don't use TMS. I never have, and I never will. And I just want to say for the record that this man retired in September, I think. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do this for HR purposes, but he actually, by the time he retired, he was asking if he could come back as a volunteer and do data entry. Wonderful, wonderful person, and I miss him all the time. But the point is that he wasn't saying it because he's a natural curmudgeon. He's saying this because he's a carpenter and a mount maker. his skill set is with his hands, his skill set is with lighting, his skill set is with the physicality of art. He was trained at a time where he was basically given his marching orders, and then he went and he did it. He either put art on the wall, stuck it in a vitrine, built a mount, and then asking him to say, okay, well, your job is changing and now you have to do something that's completely foreign to you. You know, there might be a little bit of annoyance, but a lot of it is fear because, you know, he wants to do a good job. And how is he gonna do a good job if I'm asking him to do something that he's never really seen or experienced? And I, a person who he's never met in his life, I'm saying, trust me to do this. So it was, he, you know, could barely work his phone, let alone a very large, vast, and poorly configured database. It's now better. It's a better configuration. I feel like I have to say this. I have too much ego not to.
Oh my gosh.
At the time, you know, there was a fear and frustration and a sense of, why are you making me do this when a preparator's job isn't to use the database in the first place?
And I will say that some of this kind of battle and struggle predates me for when I came to LACMA, but there was a very similar ethos to the way that preparators worked, to the point of where now we have launched this new system, which Laura mentioned briefly in my bio, where we went from a paper system where literally art preps were given a piece of paper that says, this is the work, these are the objects that are going into this room or whatever, and physically writing down the changes that they made, the movement, like what art went on which shelf onto a piece of paper that then got handed over to my team. We are now at a system where they get email alerts and they log into a system and they look at a screen and it tells them what work they have on tap for that today. And they are entering data into that system that then via an integration gets back to the main collections management database. So there was definitely a lot of training that was needed to get into that place, but I do promise you it is possible. And the way that you do that is demonstrating the value and also building up digital literacy, because we had people who went from maybe checking their email once a month to getting 5 or 6 emails a day. Like, these people didn't know how to make a bookmark in a browser, and they are now actively entering data into a database. So one thing, we're centering this a lot around art movement, and it can be that can be something that we're talking about with preparators. Usually, like from my experience, is that you're just trying to get people, not just preparators, but a lot of times preparators, to just say where you have put this priceless 1,000-year-old thing. Just tell me what shelf, where you moved it. It just needs to be logged in somewhere so that we know where it is. Because as we all know, in an ideal world, when an artwork is moved or an object or a cultural material, that location is immediately updated. There are reasons for this: loss prevention, disaster prevention, and physical care. All of that work. It's important to remember, like when people come at you with this is not my job, that collections care, especially if you work in a museum where collecting is in the mission, as problematic as that is, it is the collective responsibility of everyone who is working with that collection to engage in collections care. And this includes data entry. And one of the reasons is that databases are as much about communication as they are about record keeping. We need to shift people away from thinking like, oh, that's in the checklist, or oh, that's in the spreadsheet, or, you know, oh, that's part of the calendar, to you don't talk to a human for this information. You don't check the network drives for a PDF for this information. Everyone is working together to put what they know and what they've done into the database. And that is as much communication as it is accountability for the workflow for whatever you're trying to accomplish.
And, you know, as I don't know if you hear my son laughing in the background, you know, we're still, at least for where I am in terms of that preparator meet database scenario, and how I mentioned that our preparator retired, one of our preparators retired, we've taken a few steps back. And Amanda will sort of talk about why that will have impacted our workflow a little bit. But we are still in the iterative phase as I work to, again, reinforce that data entry. As Amanda says, it's not just like somebody pecking away at a computer, it's a shared means of communication and collective responsibility. You know, and a good example is that right now we're trying to get preparators to enter case information for exhibitions. You know, the museum has like 96 or 97 cases. And when we do run checklists, we do need that case in there. And we're trying to do the carrot and the stick approach of saying, okay, well, you know, we're freezing these drives. We're not letting you do this. We're not putting this information here. It's only in the database, which is hard for them to wrap their minds around. But then we're also saying, okay, and I have an open door policy, and come to me if you need training, and here you go. And oh, do you not like this configuration? Okay, I'll try again, just talk to me. So you do have to have some thick skin to do this as well, because, you know, if somebody comes to you and says, well, I don't like this, that's great. That's fantastic. It might sting a little bit because you're going, but I made this for you. And they're saying, well, I don't like this, and that's okay. So you're there to figure out what they need, and they need to be communicating with you. So that's sort of where we are, is they're communicating, or we're working to communicate with one another about what it is that they want, what it is I can do for them. And then just sort of fielding the fact that this is really tough. And I'm have my empathy hat on, because it really, in addition to that, we are short-staffed. It's a pandemic. This is nuts. And I'm asking them to try a new thing. So I'm trying to make it as easy as possible with the configuration, but then also just trying to demonstrate patience when they're not getting it for the 54th time.
Right, and like I said, we have launched that application, that art movement and tracking application, but we're still iterating. We launched a minimally viable product, and we before that cycle even finished, we got a wish list back of things that they wanted to change or things they wanted to add, which we do, and we have regular meetings, or we have open lines of communication where people can be like, hey, this is a problem, can we fix it, how do we hack this? But getting to that point where people were actually consistently using it, we had a full training program, which I'll talk about how to do that a little bit later. And I also had an open door policy with these guys. You know, most of the time I get communicated with email or phone calls, and I go to that person's desk. Well, art preps don't really sit behind a desk. They aren't, and they're kind of hard to track down. They could be anywhere in the museum. And so I had the reverse, being like, come to me. And I had lots of drive-bys where people came to me instead, which worked. I mean, I got surprised a couple of times, but that's how we actually kept the work moving forward. And I will say that none of that would have been possible without the person who was helming that team. And she was one of the people who kind of pushed people out of their comfort zone, saying like, we not only do I want you to take charge of your work and be an active participant, I also want you to be an active participant in the museum, and this is the tool of how we're going to do this. And it would not have been possible without her help and support. So have an advocate with you and a co-conspirator. That will do wonders.
So our second case study, systems and subject matter, the incompatibility between the two. The person managing the database does not hold the knowledge. A database manager is not the expert. You are the expert on the tech, or you are expert on the database or the systems. You are not the expert on what needs to go in it, and that is a very, very good thing. Unfortunately, they were not built with curators or educators in mind. As Amanda said earlier, these are basically digital card catalogs. They're registrarial tools. They're very good at putting things in boxes and only the boxes as prescribed. And while, you know, you can do things like rename fields and change forms and other ways, you're ultimately sort of hampered by the technology and the fact that it wasn't made for multiple ways of knowing or approaching certain information. You know, and I'm just specifically thinking of TMS. MIMSI was pretty bad too. KE is a whole mess. I haven't used MVARC, but you know, I've heard Argus is a bear as well, but I'm throwing all these names out here because like they hold knowledge in a very specific way, but they don't hold knowledge for the people that actually need to access and enter it. You know, curators and educators are the people who actually are the experts. They are the content experts. They know about the object. They're the ones who can make your data rich and round and interesting. But they are not going to know how to use the database because it was not made for people with their way of thinking. And that's bad. You know, there's a lot of sort of us versus them mindsets with curators. And I think that that's true. And that's true in other ways that we won't get into here because that's not the topic of the talk. But, you know, in this sense, like they are the experts and we need to make sure that their expertise is recorded because, you know, there's this sort of hermeneutical approach to object knowledge that's just beautiful and wonderful and not compatible with the museum system. Because when they make all these upgrades, they fail to take in one of the most basic things, which is like a keyword search. I mean, holy crap, right? So, you know, how can we ask somebody, if we're sitting there saying, curator, just use the database. I know that, you know, for those of us who have worked with curators who have database logins, but don't necessarily touch it because they can't, they're like, well, I'd rather use the website. I'd rather use the asset management system because I can do this instead of that. And you feel like you're banging your head against a wall. Just understand that that's because that's not how their brains work. And the thing that you're asking them to do wasn't even made for them in the first place. There's a reason they're resistant to it. And it's largely because it's not for them in the first place. Can you advance? So, you know, the story that I'm going to tell was with permission of the curator. But a while back, a member of our staff who is no longer at the museum recorded titles of artwork in a way that she thought would be helpful. These are not the titles of the artwork, of this bunch of artworks. As an example, she saw a picture of two women with their mouths open. She learned that it was throat singing. And so she called the painting in the database. She wrote Untitled, in parentheses, two women throat singing. That's not the title. The title alludes to two women. I don't even know what the actual titles. We're still trying to figure that out. But it alludes to two women. It alludes to singing. But, you know, this person who was logging the data really wanted to show that, like, that it's a very specific form of singing. And she did this to several artworks where she chose a title, either because the artwork didn't come with it or because she just thought it would be easier to find that way by typing in what she saw as opposed to what maybe the artist saw, which is a weird thing to do. But, you know, she thought she was helping, but she wasn't, right? It's not okay. And it's especially not okay because a lot of the titles and the content actually pertained to certain Inuit practices. And so when we brought in our curator of Native American art, she's sort of trying to get to know her collection, and she sees these Inuit artworks, and she's like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And you know, there's a few other more harmful. And again, I was given her permission to say this, but somebody recorded blood quantum in our database at some point, and then defended it. And well, I don't know if the same person who defended it was the one who recorded it, but it was there and it's harmful. And our curator is Osage, and this artist whose blood quantum was recorded was Inuit. I mean, sorry, they were Tlingit, and then the artist whose titles are being sort of messed up were Inuit. And so our curator is sitting there going, this database is harmful. Why would you do this? What kind of information is this? How do you think this is okay? This is inappropriate and I don't want to touch it. And I understand why. You know, and in addition, she's also thinking about things like an artwork's relationship to land and its journey and its relationship to the culture who makes it. And she's really not seeing that. And so she doesn't want to use it, and I don't blame her. And then I led with that when we talked. When she first met, I did sort of onboard her and say, like, here's where things are stored. And she's coming back to me saying, like, this is bad. This is harmful. I'm like, okay, so let's fix this. So that was a big step for her, in sort of having that acknowledgement of, oh yeah, no, I know this is bad and this is indefensible, and I am in no way saying this is what we should have done. So you know, at the point that I was like, yeah, no, this is not great, she goes, okay, so let's fix this. Understand what harm you might be causing when you tell somebody to use the database, especially somebody whose community is actually actively harmed by information contained within the database, or whose knowledges and ways of life are being erased. Understand that the databases are sort of developed for very Western knowledges, and there's really not a way forward yet, or there are, but it's not really as collective. There are ways in which we can do better, and we're working towards it. But understand that when I ask this woman who is Osage to use a database that is actively harming the Osage people, she's really gonna be happy about it. The thing is, she also knows of better ways to do this. And again, this goes back to the fact that I am not the expert, she is. So between the two of us, we are reaching out to linked data communities, such as the Reciprocal Research Network, who look at, yes, buddy, look at Indigenous artwork of the Pacific Northwest, as well as the, we also have been grant funded by Mellon, where we have 2 positions, and there's no, like, we're not coming out with technology. We're not going to make a new database, because 1, Recruit2 already exists, but 2, we're not sure of the way forward. So we have a 3-year grant where we're literally just looking critically at our databases, looking critically at our information. We partnered with the college library, and just exploring sort of a linked governance system and different ways of knowing, and how do we make it better. And just by sort of embarking on that journey as a partnership and approaching with that sort of understanding, we are moving forward in a better way. And again, but that also, like, tying back to database usage, she's not sitting there going, like, the database is the worst thing in the world. She's sort of building that understanding and trust allows her to then say, I can make these recommendations to make this better. I can do this. But then also the other thing that I want to sort of point out is my note of being okay to spread out your tools. The database doesn't have to be the one ring. You can have multiple systems. It's okay. You know, we don't shoehorn workflows into inappropriate systems. If we say, okay, it's going to have this information, but then really we're going to look for the Reciprocal Research Network for all of this, that's great if it's appropriate and when it's appropriate. And again, that just gets buy-in, that gets people saying, okay, you understand me and I'll work with you.
So we've talked about people who are kind of struggling to engage with the database, but you also have people who are what we would call power users, who are very attached to the database and very attached to their systems and their ways of working. So the only problem with that is that the only constant with technology is change, right? Systems are updated, new things come out, new features are announced. And even even when these things are absolutely a positive change, right? They're absolutely going to make things easier. People will still cling to the old version of the old ways that they had done things, whether that's analog or digital. And I will never forget, I was at the Gallery Systems conference, And they announced a new plugin, a new tool that people had been asking about for literally years. And they're like, we're really excited about this. You can do so much more with this tool. It's infinitely more customizable. This is gonna definitely help your work. And someone raised their hand and asked, can we use the old one if we still want to? And I was like, I'm not usually on the side of vendors, but in this case, I was like, this is literally the first, like one of the times that they're giving us what we're asking for, and you want to go and use the old thing that inherently is worse. And that was somebody who was at a technology conference. So there are always going to be people who are going to want to cling to the old ways, and that is because institutional muscle memory runs deep. And that is usually favored over efficiency because it is familiar. And that same fear that impacts digital immigrants, that prevents them from engaging with technology, also affects digital natives or people who have become digital natives when their tools or their systems change. And it's important to remember that, and remember that when you are working against institutional muscle memory, you're moving upstream, and you need to be sensitive to users' needs so that they don't become overwhelmed and will still work with you. So in general, when you are either launching a new workflow or rolling out a new feature or building an entirely new system, there's a couple of steps that you want to keep in mind when you're building your plan for doing this. So you're going to identify the problem and an appropriate technological solution, whether that's a new system or an upgrade or a workflow or whatever it may be. The key is to garner early buy-in from especially power users, but also to work with stakeholders that are going to be the most impacted. The earlier you get somebody into the process, the more that they feel that this is collaborative. And remember, you're not the expert, somebody else is. It's also going to inform your design of whatever it is that you're building. So you want to be open to iterative design, and don't let the technology or your assumptions dictate how you're planning how this is going to work. So you are going to have a better understanding of the technology and the implications of what that can do, but you don't want to assume that this thing is something that one, the museum actually needs, and two, users are actually going to want to do. And very important is to produce documentation as you're going and before launch, so that when you plan out your training schedule, you have documentation ready that people can go back to and it's already there. And the other thing that's important when you are planning your training schedule is to identify what the best way is to roll this out, whether that is grouping people together by role so that you can train a bunch of people at the same time, or mixing people in a way where you will have advocates that will, or those people that were part of your design with that early buy-in, to kind of show the way to other users whenever there is pushback. And then you're going to launch, you're going to roll out your new thing. You want to make sure that you have those lines of communication open for any questions or problems, because you're still iterating. You might run into an issue that you didn't anticipate, or maybe you did rely on that assumption, or just something just wasn't working. You want to be able to make sure that you can adjust that so that people are reinforced into the new workflow, because you want to redirect institutional muscle memory for that, because that's how you're going to build in that sufficiency, and you're going to have people comfortable with moving forward. Because if users don't like or can't use what you built, they are going to hack it, or they're going to figure out a way to get around you. And that is not what we want, and is not going to help anyone. So in summary, Meredith, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Like we said, it's never not an uphill battle. There's no set it and forget it. The database is a living system because it's contributed to by living people. So there's always going to be something. I mean, in an ideal world, we configure ourselves into redundancy and just have everything go smoothly. And like, my goal in life is to be a redundant person that's never considered or consulted because everybody has what they need. That's never going to happen, but that is the future I work towards. But I'm never not going to have to push uphill. It's just because, as Amanda said, technology changes, staff turns over, new things are rolled out, new knowledges are gained. It's always something, and that's part of the job, and that's what keeps it exciting.
And as things change, or whether you start into a new role or you want to redesign something or whatever you're doing, there's always a balance between best practice and feasibility. And while it would be wonderful to have beautiful records that are completely filled out with subject headings and incredibly detailed location histories and all of that jazz, that's not possible, and it's never going to be possible. And so you want to stick to what Meredith calls tolerable chaos. You want to make sure that you have enough to keep the museum going, and you are able to fulfill all the roles that you are responsible for in a cultural heritage institution.
Yeah, the tolerable chaos of just not burning out, because you're not going to fix all the things. You're not going to put out all the fires. And honestly, like, cleanliness and hygiene when it comes to information is sort of a white supremacist construct anyway. So just be okay with it being a little bit messy, because that's fine. We're human, and in a way, so is our data. The other thing is, as Amanda said, advocates and co-conspirators are necessary. I was able to really light the fire under museum-wide use of our database. We achieved critical mass last year. So I've been at my museum since January 2018. And we achieved critical mass around last year-ish. And it was because of our new exhibitions manager and one of our registrars, who were really just, the three of us were like, why aren't we putting our loans in the database? Why aren't we putting our shipments in the database? This is ridiculous. And so when we realized that thing, when I got them to really partner with me and just start pushing, one, that uphill battle got lighter, that boulder got lighter, because it became a shared burden. And sometimes it's even just good for your mental health to go and be with that one sort of ally or co-conspirator that you have, and you're like, all right, let's just reset and gripe, and like, let's just go grab lunch. But in addition, you also sort of need that advocate or co-conspirator in another department. So for me, I'm getting the registrars to be comfortable with entering loans in the database, having that registrar sort of pro database loans, and then, advocate for it within her department and demonstrate why it was so good. Now everything is in, it's practice. It's now frowned on not to do that. And it's because building that social capital and finding somebody who's willing to fight alongside you.
And database administrators have a bird's eye view. You will see things others don't. And I get that, especially my department is under the arts administration department, like division. So technically the people who are on my same team are collections managers and registrars, and like the people who kind of fill out those traditional roles. However, I work with way more people than that, because I am part of systems that impact communications and marketing and rights and reproductions, publications, photo services, all of those other people. And so I and my team are able to kind of see the big picture when it comes to digital workflows and digital cycles as things kind of move throughout the museum for what I consider the two dominant priorities in the institution, which are exhibitions and acquisitions. And so you will be able to bring things, besides having a bird's eye view, you also know the technology really, really well. And so you are going to be able to pull threads and make connections that other people don't, but you do still want to keep in mind that you're still not a subject matter expert. You want to make sure that you are incorporating other people's points of view so that the overall work works for the entire institution.
Communication skills are 10 times more important than tech skills. I cannot say that enough. A lot of us come to this job not with CS degrees, but art history, library science, museum studies, English. Like, most of us are humanities people that just happen to be particularly good at a certain thing, or picked it up quickly, or were a warm body and somebody needed something to get done, which has happened to me multiple times. But the point is that you know, tech skills are pretty teachable. And if they're not, then you have usually a service agreement with your vendor, or if you're using an enterprise system, there is a cadre of people out there to help you. There is a very active TMS user group on Slack. So there's always somebody who can help you. But what's more important is being able to communicate with your users, being able to understand what they want and then fulfill that or speak with them. A lot of times we find ourselves, kind of going back to Amanda's earlier point, we find ourselves as mediators because we have this bird's eye view of the museum, because we work with so many people. A lot of times we find ourselves in the middle of something, and maybe it's not necessarily our workflow per se, but it maybe involves the tools that we manage. And because we understand that, we can sit there and listen. And then again, that just builds that trust. When you are somebody who's approachable, and I want to be very clear that when I'm saying approachable, I'm not meaning in like that gendered, oh, smile because, blah. No, you don't have to smile at your users. Be approachable as in they should be comfortable going to you for help because you can help them and you understand what they're saying. So like I said, it's soft skills 10 times more important, because Amanda and I did not come to this job knowing SQL. We learned it.
No, I did not. I mean, I've told people before that, you know, my coworkers, that my degree is in art history and museum studies. I don't have a science degree. I don't have a computer science degree. And people are kind of flabbergasted. And I'm like, you have no idea how powerful Google is in learning how to do things. But what you want to focus on is making sure that you've built a system that will work for the institution, and you can't do that without communication. And Meredith said this before, but no one is going to care as much about the database as you, and it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Things are going to make sense to you, and you're going to see the possibilities of, oh, if I can just get these 5 people to do this thing consistently, then we're going to get product A, B, and C out of it, and it'll tie into this, and this can go on the website, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because you have to find that balance between best practice and feasibility, and understand that just it's not going to click for everyone, and not everyone is going to appreciate a beautifully completed record the way that you do. It's just not going to happen. But it's going to be okay. You can still get your job done, and the museum will still run even if everything is not perfect.
Perfection is a white supremacist value.
Yes, thank you, Meredith.
You're welcome.
So we've put together a list of resources, and I promise you this is not self-promotion. These are honestly, like, we are creating the resources that we wish we had. So we've got a couple of sessions that either I or Meredith have done or other people have done with us. We've got a couple of blog posts and bibliographies for you to read. I highly suggest that you check out Your Data Are Probably Racist. Just trust me on that. It's going to be a fantastic ride, and actually just watch the whole thing. Just sit back, get your favorite beverage, because it's going to be fun. I am going to be tweeting out the slides after the end of this presentation, so don't worry about that. And like Meredith said, honestly, the best way to get in touch with us is Twitter. Meredith also said that there was an active Slack user group for TMS. I am one of the admins for that, so if you want in on that, tweet me and I will get you onto that. But if there are any questions, we can take those now.
Yeah, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourselves as well.
Meredith and I also have stories for days. So if you just want to hear a story or talk about a concept more, we can certainly do that. And also, if you can't think of a question now, or if you're shy, which is also completely understandable, you can tweet us later. Like Meredith said, we just want it to be easier for the next people. Like there is so much that we have learned that we are very happy and willing to share if anyone has anything that they want to talk about.
Yeah.
I have a question. And I was wondering if you've had any experience in users who are pretty enthusiastic about the database, but kind of go rogue and like reining that in. And kind of, I feel like I always am balancing this. I want everybody to use the database versus like, I don't want anybody to touch it because want to be the only person who touches the data because everybody else messes it up.
Meredith, do we have any experience with people going rogue?
Oh man, like full on X-Men. Yeah. There's a few things. I think like the first thing that popped into my head was like, don't let them touch the fields if you don't want them to. So like hide them or make them read only. So I think efficient configuration is part of that. But I guess I also would pose the question to you of like, what do you mean by mess things up? Like, what are they doing that's so messy?
Yeah, that's a question. Some things I've just kind of told myself to like let it go and like it's not a big deal and just kind of given up on right, like making the data look correct. But I've also found so today I found just today somebody had gone in and identified an artist that had been listed as an unknown artist, which was great. But when they went to edit that record, instead of creating a new artist record, they changed unknown artist to that person. So then I had 400 records now attributed to this one artist and had to do quite a lot of cleanup. So obviously like mistakes happen, like I could have made that mistake as well, but I guess maybe the answer is more training, but I guess comes back to Amanda's point of like how many times do you do the more training?
So I will tell you that the exact same thing has happened in my institution multiple times.
That's why we were like laughing.
By different people.
Like,
and
yes.
I will say this, that LACMA has a collection of about 100, depending on how you count, 150,000 objects. Many, and those span across time and space. So we have a fair amount of things, especially in our non-Western collections, that have not known or previously known makers. And we have had several people go in and alter and put a name into the unknown constituent, thereby also changing how that presents on the web layer, because our database refreshes like on an hourly or mostly hourly schedule. So I will have like easily 80,000 records that are now attributed to some random like British dude or something like that, when the piece was clearly made in like, you know, ancient Egypt or something like that. You catch it, you fix it, and you tell that person what they did wrong. And I will say that if somebody consistently does data wrong or does things that are very massively wrong, one, that's extra training. Two, they're probably not doing it on purpose, so you do want to be patient with that person. But if someone just truly doesn't get it, you can revoke access.
Cut them off.
You can do it. Like if that is just beyond their skill set and their talents lie elsewhere, that is okay. That is okay. And it is better to preserve the sanity of both you and that human. I will. Oh, I'm sorry. Now I have a dog that is barking. Meredith, would you like to share your story?
Which one? I mean, the one that Amanda was saying was what I'm thinking. Is just like people constantly just renaming authority fields. Cut them off if they can't behave. It's like a very sort of hard line thing, but that does go back to the Amanda Dearolph 3 strikes rule, which is like Amanda never goes over strike 4, which is you're done. Because there is no strike 4, right? if they somehow through repetitive like retrainings and consistent like stop messing things up away their privileges and you tell them why, and it's okay, because then they'll probably feel bad.
Yeah, I would say that something that's probably more applicable to that, other than that situation, is that so my team also manages the digital asset management system, and it's pretty open there. We erred more on the side of telling people like, hey, check these fields first before you use the thing. You know, a lot of this stuff is copyrighted, and there are so many people who think that that rule doesn't apply to them, especially education. They're like, we're a museum, so everything we do is fair use. That is wrong. That is wrong. And there are contemporary artists who can be extremely litigious if you do something that they don't like with their art. And so there are situations where you have to, one, get on that person. Remember, open lines of communication being like, hey, you downloaded this. This is with an artist who gets very mad if you do not use this specific image of this piece. What are you doing? And that person will come back and be like, oh, I'm putting it in a PowerPoint, and I'm gonna show it to, you know, internally, and it's gonna be fine. And I'm like, yeah, is that PowerPoint gonna go on the internet? Are you gonna post it somewhere? And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, great, you cannot use that image, delete it and go find another one. So it's, again, you're reinforcing workflows and rules so that people understand. And you're gonna, another thing that I tell people is that you embrace auditing, because if you're trusting people and you're kind of decentralizing data entry and data knowledge, not everyone's going to get it right. And in fact, when I'm training people, especially people who are going to be power users, I tell them, you are going to do something wrong. You're going to break something, and it's okay. Come to me and tell me, and I will fix it. Or I catch it on the audit and I tell them they're doing it wrong, and I tell them to fix it, unless it's a massive mistake and like they need help fixing it. I think there's a question on the chat.
Platform for documenting procedures. I have two, and I feel like Amanda might shake her head and say I'm doing too much, and maybe I am, but again, this is still relatively new for my museum, and so I'm okay with it. But I actually have documents in two places that I keep updated. I have, and this was based actually on a survey. I sent users out a survey about what they would wanted to see in documentation, and this is based on their feedback. But my two main forms are a very quick and dirty Google site, just because it's also open for other people to add. So it's more of like a knowledge base. So, you know, people who sort of own a process can go in and write their own articles. So I've tried to just make sure that there's like a low barrier to entry. So Google sites. And then I also make every instruction that I've ever written ever, because sometimes I will, like, if somebody really needs all the hand-holding in the world, I will make them their own instruction manual. And that doesn't necessarily need to go on the Google site, but it does go on our sort of like shared cloud storage. So like we have like SharePoint or something. So like everybody just goes into SharePoint. So it sort of depends on the user, because some people are like really happy with the website. They like that it's more dynamic. And then some people are like, no, there's some people who they really love their printers and they're never gonna let go of their printers. So I make PDFs of everything and I put it in SharePoint. And so there's two different places. They are always updated. I know it's a little extra, but again, it's what they asked for. And I'm okay with it.
Girl, you doing the most. I have a Google site as well. It's a Google site that I inherited, and I actually had a back burner project that I will hopefully get to this year of relaunching a new updated Google site. I will say that TMS is so integrated in the work that we do for lots of things, but specifically exhibitions and acquisitions, that my site is as much a instruction book on how to use TMS, like click this button in this order, and it also contains workflows and like and it has links out to other Google Forms or other platforms or whatever is appropriate, that says, oh, you need to talk to this person in this way to get this started, and then come back to the database and put this in, or whatever they tell you. So I really like Google Sites because you can make tables, you can embed images, you can embed links. You can also put a Google site, again, this is TMS specific, but you can put a website as your homepage for TMS when you log in. And so that is what people see when they log in, as they see the procedure site, and it's clickable so that people can go in and look at things. And I also use that as like the news outlet, like the news bulletin. So if there's anything that I need to tell people quickly, being like, hey, we upgraded, check this out before you go forth and conquer. People see that when they log in, and that again reinforces that there's documentation, and please use it. Please, for the love of God, use it. But I would say that, yeah, you want to think about what works best for your museum. My museum is a Google shop, and our IT has pushed Google really, really hard. So I'm happy to get on that bandwagon, but I'm sure that for other places who maybe use Microsoft Outlet or need to use SharePoint or something like that, like, talk to your IT people and figure out what will work for you. I think we have another question, or maybe not, I'm not sure.
Oh, that was just me saying I also use it as a news bulletin, but I don't even use it for like necessarily database announcements. Like I just sometimes use it as like a general pin board as well. So like if you log into TMS, sometimes I'll be like, hey, meeting reminder, like we're going to talk about media onto my invite. And I do, it works.
I haven't done that. I think I have too many users for that. I've got people who be like, what meeting? And they'll be like, oh, not you, different department.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, Carol was saying, I've had some good luck with setting up oops alerts in my system, letting users know when they failed to enter required values, entering conflicting values, etc. I think Amanda has some interesting reports in which print error message if data entry is incomplete. Oh yeah, I do. So Meredith mentioned briefly using the carrot and the stick. So the stick would definitely be access levels and, rolling back user groups and things like that. But for me, the carrot is reporting, because everybody loves their reports. Everybody wants that tombstone report. Everybody wants that illustrated checklist. They want, their documentation to come out perfectly and not have to type into a Word doc, which I do accommodate as much as I can. And something that I tell people at conferences all the time is that if you are at a point where you're using your database to generate documentation, whether that's loan agreement forms or deeds of gift or checklists or things like that, make it so that your report requires clean or complete data entry. And that way people have the incentive to do it right or go back and fix it so that the report works the correct way and they don't have to do export edits. And it is also helpful if you can build tricks into your report where it says in big red letters, hey, like this section isn't populating because you did not link the shipment record, or there's no value, or whatever. It draws people's attentions to what is missing or what is incorrect or what is incomplete, and they go back and fix it, and then the report works. So that is definitely something that works for a lot of people. And it also, a lot of people do want to do things correctly. Like people know that, one, you hate to bother your coworker unnecessarily, and two, they also know that you're not telepathic. It's going to take you, between 10 minutes to 2 hours, 2 days to get back to them. So people do usually want to be self-sufficient. If you leave those breadcrumbs, they will embrace that. And something else that just popped into my head with the question that Sierra had posed about people going rogue. What I tell people, especially when I'm onboarding new team members to my team and I'm teaching them how to manage and administer databases, is that we are looking for completeness, not correctness. So we are not subject matter experts. Like, I know a fair amount about Baroque and Rococo art and costume history, but I'm definitely not the expert. I don't know what's correct. Same thing. I'm not the person that went into the gallery and took something off the wall and put it in conservation for them to do a treatment. Like, I didn't do that. I don't know what is actually correct. And so at a certain point, you do kind of have to trust people that what they're doing is, or what they're entering is correct. And if it's not, someone's going to figure it out eventually. And so I care more about what's being entered has been entered in correctly, not necessarily that it is inherently correct, which is something that can be hard to let go of, especially if people are like really latched onto that, like the idea of the pristine database, which again, one, does not exist, and two, is a white supremacist concept.
Yeah, maybe we should drop that into the, because like, I just also want to be like, Amanda and I say like, this is a way to, we're not saying like, you know, like the very like overt David Duke, like, no, there's an actual, I think it was, I'm going to try to drop this into the chat because it's really good just to know. So, I think it's by Temple Kuhn and somebody else.
What's it called? What's the title of it?
I found it, it's Workbook for Social Change Groups. But it's like the antidotes to white supremacy. It shows up in a lot of different areas, but I'm
almost positive that that's in the culturally inclusive data practices bibliography that I have linked.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, I just dropped a version of
it. It's a classic and it is super, super helpful.
Yeah, but I mean, I also just want to like, that we didn't really touch, that we touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to also, again, reiterate what, like, that this isn't our data as database managers, this is the user's data. And sometimes that even like simple sentence helps, like, you know, this is for you, right? This is all for you. I'm building this for you in the first place. So if you don't like it, you need to tell me so I can fix it. And that sort of goes back to what Amanda's saying is like, you know, because sometimes people always say, well, this is wrong, the data is wrong, this is bad. I'm like, I have no idea if it's bad or not. I built this for you. So that's also just something to keep in mind, or just say if somebody's in their way, well, I can't find it, it's not there. Like sometimes even just proving what happens if you don't participate is a really strong.
One of my favorite things
what happens if you don't do?
Oh my God, I get random emails from everyone from like comms and marketing to curatorial being like, hey, I am looking for art that was made in this century by this nationality maker that fits these 5 other criteria. And I'm like, great, where have you been putting that in the database? Oh, you're looking for photographs made in the 19th century by Irish American artists? Great, tell me where you've been putting that in the database and I will help you find that. Oh, you haven't? Oh, well then I can't find that for you.
Yeah, like, or you pull the report because it's sort of, then they're like, no, it's missing these 5 artworks. And you're like, okay, but who, you know, but again, also just like, you know, if there's like, I don't have the time, it's like, okay, well, if you don't have the time, how do we fix this for you? Because, you know, also reinforcing that you, the database manager, aren't necessarily the ones doing the entry, but like, how do we make it work? How does that happen? But sometimes it's just even training them, like do that, or like say, hey, get a paid intern, pay your interns and work with them and teach them, professionalize it. But like, figure out ways to work with them to get their data in there if they cannot be the ones to do this. But also don't let them get unpaid internships because that's abuse.
I also had somebody request something who was outside of the museum. They were working on their dissertation or something or other, and they were looking for art that was not inherently religious, but had Christian iconography in it. And I was like, I can't, no. They're like, that's not recorded. I'm like, no one's looking for Christian iconography in art that is not Christian and marking that in the database. That's not a thing. I'm sorry. I can help you in another way maybe, but like, I can't just spit out a list for you. That's not a thing that exists in real life.
I mean, yeah, you have to get people to buy into the concept of subject tagging, right? Because like mine might, because people love to tag in mine because we're a teaching collection. So like that is a thing that people search for, right? So it's sort of just, you know, like knowing the data helps too. And then I was going to say something else and I completely forgot, and it sucks because I feel like it was a really good point.
You can tweet it later.
Yeah.
Well, do we have any other questions for Amanda or Meredith? And like the both of them said too, if you think of some later or you're too shy, you can catch them on Twitter.
Yes, that, and also like if somebody else has a question or somebody mentions something to you, like, oh my God, this user, you can say, oh, I know these two people, they can talk to you. Because that is actually, we are open also to phone conversations, Zoom conversations. That's actually how I came up with the Amanda Dearolph 3 strikes rule, because I had seriously maybe like 2 years of multiple phone calls with people telling me, I can't get my users to do the things. I can't get them. They're not listening to me. And I'm like, I know this person. Her name is Amanda. She's the best manager I've ever met. She does this thing. So
yeah, I can't even tell you how many informational interviews and knowledge shares that I do on a regular basis for people who are just, you know, trying to do a similar job at another institution. So we can definitely make that happen.
we're here for you.
Awesome. Well, I think we're a little bit over time. So if there are no more questions, I think we'll just kind of wrap it up. All right. Well, thank you two so much. I manage databases too, and I learned a whole lot, and I can't wait to bring it back to my students and to my institution. So, you know, I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, guys. Good
All
luck.
right, good night, everybody.